So I hope everyone sees my slides. Yes, some nodding heads. Yes, hi, my name is Thomas Schmidt from the University of Regensburg, and we were already introduced. I will talk about annotating and quantifying sentiment and emotions in German plays from around 1800. And as you can see, we are two persons, so we separated this talk also in two parts, and I will deal with the first part. My part will deal with what we call the past, which are our adventures in the realm of sentiment analysis in German literary texts by the playwright Gotthold Ephraim Lessing. And then Katrin will continue by talking about emotion annotation and analysis in plays around 1800, our current project, Emotion and Drama, and how we pursue this topic in this current project. So as I said, I will talk a lot about sentiment analysis in Lessing's plays. This will also really be focused just on sentiment. So the pure balance of text, if it's rather positive, negative, maybe mixed or neutral. And of course, there will be a lot of German appearing. I try to translate it if it's necessary, but sometimes it's just for visualization purposes. So I hope that you still can follow the talk anyways. Our adventures, as I said, with sentiment analysis are actually rooted in another project. So once upon a time in the distant past, the year 2018, we actually performed a lot of quantitative drama analysis. So we developed a tool named Catharsis, which is a web tool to explore quantitative metrics of plays like speech statistics or character appearances and visualize these information on a web tool. And while exploring quantitative drama analysis, we also encountered, of course, the method of sentiment analysis, and we deemed it interesting to pursue. We decided to focus the sentiment analysis, or more precisely, our pilot study in the realm of sentiment analysis on the plays of Lessing, just because we felt most comfortable with the author itself. So the corpus that I will talk about in the upcoming slides and that we explored sentiment and analysis on are all the plays of Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, a famous playwright of Germany. As you can see, there are a lot of comedies in this corpus, a couple of tragedies. It's everything around 1750. So of course, a lot of historical language and the upcoming problems are pretty apparent. As you probably have already learned in this workshop, I'm sure there are multiple methods to perform sentiment analysis. One major branch is, of course, to perform machine learning if you have some sort of annotated corpora that you can use. Another method would be lexicon-based methods, and I'm also sure that you heard a lot about those methods. Since we didn't have any annotated material that we could use for machine learning, and we also didn't see much potential using contemporary corpora due to the language problems, we decided to pursue the method of lexicon-based sentiment analysis. Again, as you probably already learned, it's based on so-called sentiment lexicons, which are basically lists of words with sentiment-bearing words that are annotated concerning their polarity, their valence, so if the word is rather negative or positive. And then you can perform some very basic mathematics. You can count the positive words, the negative words, perform some very naive calculations to get an overall value of the text unit. That's some basic case. Of course, there are some methods to optimize this approach or to perform it more sophisticated. Nevertheless, that's what we pursued. Before I talk about the concrete pipeline we developed and the concrete steps we performed to deal with a lot of the challenges, I will first have to talk about the specific level on which we perform sentiment analysis for the evaluation and the overall analysis of plays. Later on, you will see we will basically perform sentiment analysis on all structural levels from the act to the scene, but the evaluation process and so on is focused on what is called the speech, which is the utterance of a character separated by the utterance of another character. This can be a word, this can be a sentence, this can be, of course, multiple sentences. But it's a very central unit of place, and we, of course, deemed it very fitting for our first analysis. So there are multiple steps that we evaluated. You can think about it as a pipeline, so to speak, with multiple possibilities where you can choose various variants of steps. We evaluated 5 of the most popular German sentiment lexicons of contemporary language, so they are not directly optimized on our language. We explored lemmatization. Of course, many of the sentiment lexicons only consist of the base forms of words. Since German has a lot of inflections, lemmatization is, more to speak, a step that you have to take most of the time. We also explored the influence of filtering stop words, or more precisely, high-frequency words. This might sound like something that's not important for sentiment analysis, but we actually explored this. This might be very important. And of course, we explored possibilities to extend our lexicon with historical variants, historical orthographic forms of words in the lexicon. I also integrated the step of including negations and valence shifters, and I will also talk a little bit about that step. So to explain why we chose certain steps and to explain the influence of certain steps, I will work my way through a couple of limitations, of general limitations of sentiment-based methods, of lexicon-based methods, and specifically on this corpus. And I will first focus on the lexical level. So basically everything that can go wrong on the word level. I'm sure you already have some opinions about this, or some experience about this. The most important lexical problem that we encountered are orthographic alternatives, orthographic variants of words in German. So these are basically words that a contemporary reader would actually understand, but if you make a very precise mapping between lexicon and text, and you go by character by character, you encounter problems if you don't map these words to each other. So just a simple example, the word betrügen in German, betray in English, is just word used in a different orthographic form by Lessing, betriegen. But of course, if you do exact matching, you wouldn't find this. We explored a bit the possibilities of spell checking, but weren't that successful with this approach. So what we actually found is something that not we did develop, but someone else developed. Brian Urish from the Deutsches Textarchiv developed a algorithm/tool and also a REST API, so to speak, that you can send German words towards, and you receive historical variants of these words, so orthographic forms of these words that this word had throughout the history of language. So for example, if you send betrügen to these words, you do get a lot of historical variants, and you do indeed get the word betriegen, which is how Lessing would use it. You also get a lot of inflections, so it's also some sort of lemmatization if you take it precisely. But by this way, we extended the lexicons with historical variants, and this is, of all the methods that we applied, this is the one that deemed most successful. This is the one method that really changes accuracy metrics later on. But it also has a very high recall, so you have a couple of false positives also. It really enlarges the lexicon greatly. Another thing that we just encountered when we actually performed sentiment analysis is the problem of very high frequency words that change their valence, so to speak, throughout the time. The prime example for this is actually the word Herr. The word Herr in German, you can probably translate it with something like Mr. It's a form to address a male person in German, but it also receives quite a negative connotation in contemporary German. And for this reason, in contemporary lexicons, it's included as annotated negatively, oftentimes. And Lessing uses this word all the time, and it has no no valence meaning at all. It's just a word he uses to describe the interaction between his characters. And of course, if you don't filter something like this out, you get basically just negative predictions, and that's not what you want. And this is a larger problem than you might expect at the first sight. Of course, easy to solve. You just extend stop word lists with these high frequency words by taking, I don't know, something like the top 200 words, and then you can deal with this. Of course, there are multiple other problems on the lexical level for lexicon-based sentiment analysis, some of which we didn't solve in particular way, and it's also a bit unsure if it's solvable on a lexical level. Poetic words, neologisms, novel words invented by Lessing to describe something, metaphoric words, and of course you have multiple other words that change their sentiment throughout the time. One example here is Flyer. Another example that Lessing actually uses also the word toll, which describes a crazy person in the past, and nowadays it's a very, very positive word. And we would argue that only domain-specific lexicons and, of course, machine learning might solve some of these problems. Nevertheless, we have another step, as already mentioned, which are negations and valence shifters, so words that occur in the surrounding of a sentiment-bearing word and change the sentiment of this word. And we used a list of German negations, a list of negating prefixes and suffixes to change the value of a sentiment-bearing word if these words are close to the word. We use a window of 4 words. Wiegand and colleagues actually did some studies on German language and argued that 4 words is the window to use for this. And yeah, that's also something we explored. Now, to actually evaluate our approaches, we of course had to annotate some of our speeches. So we had to create some sort of gold standard. Our first pilot study in this annotation project was rather naive, you might say. We basically prepared Word files for 5 annotators. Those annotators received no special training. These were just normal students, so to speak. I selected semi-randomly 200 speeches, presented the speech, the predecessor speech, the speech after that, and they annotated the polarity on a differentiated level and on a binary level. And the binary level is the most interesting up for us. So does the speech express a rather positive or a negative sentiment? And not super surprisingly, but for me personally at the moment, surprisingly, we looked at agreement statistics, so how much agree the annotators to each other, a very important metric in sentiment analysis. And the agreement statistics are rather low. So we get average kappa values of 0.4, which is regarded, according to some interpretations, moderate agreement, but is much lower than in other areas of sentiment analysis. So at this moment, we thought, okay, those were non-experts. They had no clue of the historical language and so on. We actually also did some empirical work. We posed the annotators a questionnaire in which they could fill out information about how they perceive the annotation. And they actually did report back that the annotation was very difficult. They were very uncertain about the annotation. It was very tedious. They had difficulties with language and the missing context. Not too surprising at that moment. Of course, they also had a lot of other problems on a much broader level. How are they supposed to deal with irony, with sarcasm, with metaphors, with mixed expressions in one specific text unit? And of course, we identified at that moment also that literary texts probably have some sort of inherent subjectivity. They're always open to interpretation, and all this leads to very low agreement levels. Nevertheless, our argument was if we get some annotators that are more motivated, more trained, we might get better results. So we prepared another annotation study that we integrated in a course for German literary studies. So with students that actually had to read the plays, they talked about the plays, about emotions and sentiments in the plays. We prepared a very long and detailed annotation instruction. So what to actually annotate. It was also broader in scope. we acquired overall 1,200 speeches annotated by at least 2 annotators. And yeah, furthermore, I even traveled one day to this course, and I delivered all the students that performed the annotation some candy. So there's not much more to expect from a researcher annotator relationship perspective that I could have done better. Nevertheless, we again received the same feedback and the same agreement statistics, basically. So it's around 0.4, around 70% for binary polarity. At that moment, we, of course, realized also by the feedback of the students that the problem is more in the text sort itself, and in the problem that even if you have more context and if you know more of the place, you also can tend to overthink. And the result of our interpretation of this is that we need some sort of even more precise training and more specific annotation schemes. On a distributional level, just for information purposes, we realized in this study, but also in other studies, that annotators tend to annotate most speeches rather negative, which is counterintuitive in the first moment if you think about that our corpus consists of mostly comedies. But of course, if you read the comedies more precisely, they are still full of tragic content, so it makes some sense. Overall, this didn't stop us to evaluate our approaches by performing majority decisions and by filtering out speeches that are not have high disagreement. We still performed our lexicon-based approaches as described before, with all the configuration possibilities of the pipeline for all the lexicons and so on. And our best approaches achieve accuracies about 0.7, so 70% of the speeches are detected correctly, so to speak. Yeah, the best lexicons are basically lexicons that have more metric scales, so a scale from -1 to 1, for example, and not just the nominal scales for the positivity or negativity. The extension of historical variance is the most important method that improves accuracy, which says a lot about the text sort, of course. If you do also include something like negations and similar words, you don't get much better results. It's fluctuating also around 70%, which is overall not that high in sentiment analysis. For every example that you can find where you would argue that taking negation into account improves the result, you also find a lot of examples that prove that the result gets worse. Just a couple of examples, which are actually from the corpus. Ich fühle nichts als Glück, I feel nothing by joy. If you change the valence of joy, you get a negative sentiment, and you actually have a positive sentiment. And one thing I really learned is that the language is complex, and you can find a lot of complex examples for stuff like this. So overall, we were not very satisfied with the accuracies and also with the annotation results. It's a bit interesting because the percentage-wise agreement between annotators is actually almost the same as the accuracies we achieve. And if you look at the speeches that are falsely classified, you do indeed identify that the problems are the same from annotators' perspective as well as from algorithm perspective. So problems like irony, sarcasm, metaphors, very long speeches, and similar things. Overall, we still also wanted to explore how users are interested in sentiment analysis. So all these results didn't stop us to develop a web tool to also explore our sentiment results. I will not go into detail into this tool. The link is on the slides, and you're invited to explore it. For example, here is a draft that this tool can produce to illustrate how in a specific play, you can identify a tendency towards negativity throughout the 5 acts. And this tool produces multiple visualizations like this. We identified that users are oftentimes not cautious enough with the interpretation. They don't really keep in mind that you just have the small accuracies, so you have to be careful when interpreting. such visualization. So we currently also developed a tool giving the user more power to perform their own lexicon-based sentiment analysis, text. It also produces visualization. You can upload your own texts, and it also offers the text and what it really happens in the text. And I think that's what people are mostly interested in. They really want to see why some passages are more negative, more positive, and oftentimes what they identify is that some words are falsely interpreted by the sentiment analysis and further on. So this is also a tool you can explore if you are interested in this. Overall, this was stuff that we did so in the time span of 2018, 2019. We did realize that lexicon-based methods are limited in this context overall. We did try to explore the idea of domain-specific sentiment lexicons, which are still a topic, but overall in NLP, I would argue that they are also considered outdated, and other methods are more the go-to methods nowadays. Sentiment analysis still, lexicon-based sentiment analysis, due to the transparency of the method, still remains popular, so we still support it in some way by still supporting the tool Sentext. But overall, we knew that we had to explore more modern machine learning approaches. Of course, for those approaches, we need good and valid annotations. What we also identified is, we also saw this in user tests. For the tool Catharsis, I also integrated emotion calculations based on lexicon-based emotion analysis. I didn't evaluate them at all. I just integrated them for fun. But it's basically the first thing that people use. They switch from polarity to emotion, and they are far more interested in emotions. So obviously that's something that literary scholars are more interested in. So this is also something we identified. We needed more and better annotation. The scheme seems not to be proper to represent the thinking of literary scholars. And we also need more precise and better training for annotators to also agree to increase the agreement among these annotators. So we need annotators, student annotators that are motivated, that are in the best case paid for annotating. We need someone that deals with machine learning and has to get paid for machine learning. We need a literary scholar who is motivated by getting paid by exploring all this. So overall, we identified that we need money. So we asked for money, and money we received, which leads us to our current project, Emotions and Drama, where we do start to explore more of the sophisticated concepts. So this is the step where I will give over to Katrin. I have all the links collected to all the tools and resources that I mentioned throughout the talk on some slides. So without further ado, I thank you for your attention, and I hope you still have a lot of fun in the upcoming part.
So, a warm welcome also from my side. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Thomas, for telling the first part of our story. Here comes the second one. So Thomas already mentioned our project Emotions in Drama. It is funded by the, by the German Research Foundation, and the project leaders are Professor Wolf from Media Informatics in Regensburg, and myself coming from German Literary Studies and Computational Literary Studies in Würzburg. Thomas Schmidt is the research assistant and responsible for all the annotation stuff, the evaluation and the machine learning aspects. And the project is part of the German Research Foundation priority program, Computational Literary Studies. Here, literary scholars work together with computer scientists in 9 projects. There's a lively exchange between the projects which use the same methods, for example, sentiment analysis and word embeddings, and also between projects working on the same genre, for example, on drama or lyrics. It's a very productive research environment, which also helps to establish international networking and collaboration. Thomas presented the approaches we have taken towards sentiment analysis, and here we wanted to find out how methods like lexicon-based analysis and static word embeddings work for classifying sentiments and a few emotions in place of 18th century. In our follow-up project here now, we decided to work on a larger corpus and to investigate emotions in German drama from 1650 to about 1850. The basic assumption here is that the emotions are central to the drama of the period. To be precise, central for the dramaturgy, that is plot structure and information distribution. One may think of Aristotle's theory of catharsis as purification of suffering through the representation of suffering. Emotions are also central for the characterization of character types, such as the miles gloriosus, or the comic character, or the Jew. Emotions are also central for the intended effect on the reader or the recipient. One may think of ideas of correction or emotional movement in the Enlightenment, for example. And emotions are central for the propagation of anthropological ideas of social norms. Anthropological idea which is central in our period of time is the naturalness, the natural behavior, natural expression of emotion, for example. So here are our goals in this project. Firstly, we want to classify emotions and their evaluation or appraisal. I think this is the correct word. To be able to see distributions over one text or over subgenres or over a time period, but also to be able to investigate if there are emotional profiles of character types, of women versus men, or of bourgeois and versus nobles, and so forth. This is also part of a basic research in historical AE, because we will enlarge the possibilities of the knowledge of the AE. I will come back to this point later. So we also want to find out if there are specific subgenre-specific emotions or emotional curves over plays for subgenres like drama of the Enlightenment or musical theater or sentimental comedy or classicist tragedy and so forth. And we want to find out if there is a link between emotions and their evaluation or appraisal with the intended effect. So that means if there are special emotions in some sort of drama, if they want it to be a drama which is a sentimental comedy. All this is to be asked for canonized drama as well as for non-canonized dramatic texts, and I'll show you our corpus on the next slide. No, and on even one later. So how do we define emotion? Well, basically, like Roman Klinger or Klaus Fehrer, as a generic term for states of mind of characters in a drama of distinguishable quality at a given time. And we assume that emotions are expressed by bodily symptoms, that they may entail actions or action tendencies, and that they are expressed, namely through language, and that they may also be appraised. We use this term emotion in a meta-linguistic sense to cover all the more specific concepts of the period under research like affect, Gemütsbewegung, Passio, or Leidenschaft, to have a covering term. In dramatic texts in specific, we are interested in the emotion experienced by the characters and or attributed to them. attributed means that someone says that another character feels something, or should feel something, or asks if he feels something. So that means that we are not interested in the emotion which should be evoked in the recipient, in the one who's reading or seeing the play, because this seems far too complicated as a kind of historical empirical research without people to ask. So next slide is the corpus. Our corpus consists of canonized as well as non-canonized works and includes on the one hand the dramas from Schmidt or Gerd Rakor, and so I'm missing one page here. Sorry. Oh, it's here. Sorry for that. And we started now with the latest part of this canonized corpus, which is the part around 1800, because the language is not that far away from the trained models than the Baroque language, which we encountered in the beginning of the period. So, but in order to be able to examine non-canonized texts as well, we have done OCR and or some text encoding for the project for the following subcorpora, these 20 Kastel plays from Vienna, the 20 plays from strolling players around 1700, and about 20 to 30 opera libretti of the Hamburg opera of the same period, because around 1700 we have a huge gap in the canon of German plays. So we want to quantify emotions, and these are the steps we take to achieve this goal. We first have to annotate a training and evaluation corpus, and in the beginning stands the development of emotion annotation schemes. Then we will have to do the annotation of plays from 3 different eras with emotion and source target information, polarity, and negation information. This leads to emotion annotated training corpora, which will be used to train artificial intelligence. For this goal, we have to adapt word embeddings, and specifically bird, to historical and poetic language of those different eras. With eras, I mean periods of about 50 years in which we separated our huge period under investigation. Then we will train emotion prediction and see what comes out, and we'll do that also with non-annotated text. This will be the very interesting point of the research project. And of course, we will then try to answer all the questions I mentioned on the goals about characters and subgenres and literary history. So what is an appropriate set of emotions for this sake? So let's, if one looks at the basic emotions in psychology, one can see that they are not all relevant for our domain. Plutchik's system, for example, names fear, anger, joy, sadness, disgust, which we also choose, but also some others which we do not use because they are not specific to our domain, as for example, trust, anticipation, or surprise. They may appear, but we had to reduce ourselves, as you will see in a few seconds. The next problem is that in the long period we chose, we have several historical concepts of emotions, too many and different emotions and too many different concepts are a real problem at this point. I just named you all the 15 affective which scholastics in Baroque had in mind, and which you can easily find in the dramatic text of Gryphius or Lohenstein, of course. And the third point we had to take in mind was that those concepts of emotion should also fit for training of neural networks. So, which is a real research question. The only thing we know is that we need distinguishable cases, but we don't know really where the limits are. So we'll find out that. So the challenge was to find a set of emotions that are fundamental to plays, as well as appropriate for the entire period. And from the point of view of literary studies, the set presented on the next slide is, of course, unsatisfactory because it's not differentiated enough. But we may answer to this question that on the one hand side, we are just beginning with that kind of research. And on the other hand side, this is primarily basic research for a big part. So when we have satisfying hit rates at the end, we may retrain the classifiers on more emotions, on different concepts of love, for example, on metaphorical language use, etc. So here's our set of emotions. At the moment, we annotate 10 emotions, emotion subcategories on the left side, plus disgust, which you can find at the end of the list. We also added at the end of the list emotional movement or agitation to distinguish important, to annotate important passages of dramatic text in which characters are simply very emotionally agitated, but do not know or name the emotion, or in which they vacillate between emotions in a sentence or replica. So in some drama, this is a very common phenomenon. The upper categories of affection, joy, fear, and suffering are a kind of exit strategy for the machine learning. In other words, if it turns out that the subcategories are not well assigned in prediction, we can combine the annotated cases into the super categories and try the training with the simpler super category. So desire, love, and friendship will not be distinguished or not trained separately, but together as emotions of affection. In our set, you also see plus and minus signs. They show the default polarity. Joy, for example, is positive, suffering is negative, love is positive. If nothing special is annotated, this polarity is attributed automatically when we annotate an emotion. But because love may also be sorrowful, suffering also desired and positive, we have provided the possibility to annotate deviating polarities, as we name it. Yesterday, you have already worked thoroughly on these polarities. Therefore, now only one interesting example, Schadenfreude. It's hard to translate. Sometimes it's black humor, but in English it's also Schadenfreude. We have in our set as a positive emotion because the character who is happy about the damage of someone else has a positive emotion for him. You know? But if someone, as in this case here on the right-hand side on the slide, attributes Schadenfreude to another character and therefore depreciates him, Schadenfreude is to be annotated with a negative polarity. In the example here, Tellheim, the character Tellheim, shows the servant Just because of his treacherous Schadenfreude. We also distinguish source and target, or to be precise, utterance instance which may be either a character or the implicit author, source, and target. For source, we distinguish between the experiencer who feels the emotion and an attributing instance, which may be there, but is not necessary, of course. All these instances can be indicated in a sentence or not. Of course, the speaker or the utterance instance is always there in a dramatic text. This is a very comfortable thing about dramatic text compared to prose fiction, for example. In the example of the last slide, we had Dennerlein as attributing instance who attributed Schadenfreude to Just as an experiencer. Here we have the experiencer Just, who is also the utterance instance, who would love to beat a landlord on his back. This is the translation of the "Wenn ich ihm doch eins auf den Katzenbuckel geben dürfte." And the landlord is the target of his anger. Here we have some more examples. The first example is love, which a mother expresses towards her son. She is the source of this emotion. She's the experience of the target is her son Wilhelm, so we underlined this here. In the next example, we have emotional movement. This is the source of this is an attributing instance, the implicit author, because it's not a character speaking here. The character who's then speaking is named Unbekannter, unknown, and he, in this case, is the target of the emotional movement. Then another example, the next sentence, nein, länger halte ich nicht aus, I can't stand it anymore, expresses suffering. The experiencer is the character Unbekannter, and the target is here an event. So I think this gives an impression of what we do here. It took a while to develop our scheme. When we started, at first, the scheme grew constantly. It got more and more emotions, and we also had metaphors and other tropes and emotional cues and so forth. And then it took all very long to annotated text, and then it became slightly slimmer again. And for 5 months now, it has been stable. Still, we have some drama that need to be annotated anew now because it follows older annotation schemes. However, we learned that this is a normal process in annotation projects, so keep in mind to schedule this time in your project or PhD work. For doing the annotation, we used the Katma tool, which is a freely available web tool where you can define your tag sets, which you can see here on the right-hand side yourself. It has some difficulties with the output format. It's a bit tricky, but well, Thomas finally managed to cope with it. So our annotation workflow is 2 student assistants annotate independently of each other. And then we have a subsequent consensus annotation in the presence of the literary project management, which is the decision-making authority. That sounds amazing in English, but in fact, it's just me, this authority, having a good knowledge on that subject because I did some research on it for a few years. But it's a bit, yeah, we wanted to have it a bit like the normal work of a literary, literary studies person, because we usually discuss things in seminars, or we read other research and then build on it. And so this seemed to be a better process than 3 different independent annotations. So this is just the picture for it. So our annotation state at the moment is that we have these plays you can see here, and we have 2 up to 3 annotations, and soon in a few weeks we will start to do the first training with this training corpus. So our project is at work for in April, 1st of April last year we started. So what we want to do then, I think you are familiar with the with machine learning. It's just the idea to train a model which gets some samples first and attributes features to them. Then we correct the output of the model, which here is a neural network. And so the model learns something, gets better in prediction. The idea is that you then give them new data, and it's also good in prediction, or you correct this prediction, these results again, and do the process from the beginning. We have several baselines, as you can see here, the annotator agreement, lexicon-based approaches, classical machine learning with all those algorithms, bag of words, knife base, SVM, etc. And what they all have in common, I think you've worked that through last days, is that they attribute one value to each word. It's just one value. So in the entire corpus, queued or betrieben or whatever has one value. They are static. So what we want to do now, we want to go beyond this with the dynamic word embeddings. Here, the value of each word changes according to the environment in which it is placed. That means if you have the same word in different sentences, it will have a different value in this sentence. There's a word embedding trained already for German text on the German Wikipedia. It's called Birdcase German Cased. You see the link on the slide. And here words are represented as vectors, and words that have the same meaning have the same vector, and words with a similar meaning or with similar relations are closer to each other. So this is a mathematical expression of semantic relations, and not just a statistical representation, what is more like the static word embeddings. So this gives, it's a very mighty model. It's used a lot. There are many people developing it, and we are happy to be able to contribute a bit to this historical artificial intelligence training. So this is my last slide. Nevertheless, this word embedding has still to be improved. We have this pre-trained large word embedding. This is the German word cased one I mentioned on the last slide. But we have to train that on historical text because of the language. Thomas showed you very vividly what the problems are. This gives another problem, because we have also to train it on plays of that period or on fictional text. What you see on the bottom of the slide is a literary German word which is trained on prose fiction of several centuries. So this comes already near, and we can start with that and train it with data from 18th century, then for plays, and then we can give it our emotion annotated corpora and train it to predict our emotion and the emotions we are interested in. And this is the last point on the slide. It's the prediction, and we hope that we'll manage it. So more information you can find on these slides. Our contact information is also here, and we have put some references, but they are not really publications at that point yet of our project. We have just here those the poster slam video for the Digital Humanities Day, but I think you are the best informed persons about our project at the moment. Thank you very much, and I'm interested in your questions.
Thank you very